Hello everyone, I'm Young Ho Cho. In today's lecture, I greet you with the theme of the senses of the gods. In today's lecture, we will not only talk about God in terms of existence, but also look at how we feel, experience, and express God. God is not an object to be rationally proven or refuted, but an existence revealed in artistic and symbolic senses. In other words, God is deeply ingrained in human life through literature, myths, and the language of imagination. I'd like to start the lecture by introducing a poem by Rainer Maria Rilke. The deepest truth cannot be expressed in words. That is why we need poetry. All right, let's dive into the world of ancient Greek gods, starting with Homer's Iliad, Book 1. Here's a question to get us going. Can gods feel, or do they only think? Now, let's fast forward to the modern philosopher Descartes. He's famous for cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. This means humans can prove their existence through thought. Interestingly, Descartes hardly questioned God's existence, seeing God as the source of all being. But did he miss something? Does God only think, or can God also feel? We often interpret God's existence too literally. Modern society is used to scientific thinking, which values objective facts, verifiable data, and testable truths. But if we interpret religion this way, God can easily be treated like an unverified hypothesis. Descartes didn't provide a clear answer to whether God can feel. To find an answer, we'll jump to 19th century Germany and meet Schleiermacher. Although he was a theologian, he asked deep philosophical questions. Schleiermacher said, God is experienced within the human soul. In other words, God isn't just a distant, transcendent being, but is felt deep within our emotions and consciousness. Similarly, Rudolf Otto emphasized mystical experience, saying we can feel God through holy awe. It's hard to explain, but it's a definite wonder that we feel. This is when God approaches us in a sensory way, and the Jewish philosopher Martin Buber says, I talk to the trees. It might sound strange at first, but it carries a deep meaning. All of these figures feel the divinity alive in nature, the sensory existence of God. God isn't far away in the sky, but is inherent in the air we breathe, the wind that brushes past us, and everything we encounter. To feel God again, they arrived at this conclusion. To understand God, we need not only thought, but also feeling. God is not just a philosophical concept, but can be a being that is with us in our lives and senses. So rather than trying to explain God only through logic, we must sense and experience God. We must strive for this. So what is God to you? Is God a thinking being, a feeling being, or both? The second topic we'll share is a bit heavier. Has God really disappeared, or have we lost the meaning of God? In the past, God was the center of the world. People believed that God determined human destiny and explained all the principles of the world. But what about today? Many people no longer take God's existence for granted. In an age where science believes it can explain everything, God is now sometimes seen as an outdated concept. Schleiermacher said, a person feels the infinite in a finite life and experiences God. But now we are gradually losing the language and symbols to face such quote, infinity. The churches and worship of the past no longer provide us with a mystical experience, and religious ceremonies are now seen as just an event, in tourist destinations. Jesus, too, no longer comes to many people as a powerful force of existence that shakes their lives. What we have lost may not be just the existence of God, but the sense of being able to experience God and the language to express that sense. Another reason God has become distant in modern society is that we have tried to understand God too literally, too much like a fact. We tried to test whether God really exists and judge that if it was not proven, it does not exist. Science explains the world very well, but it only explained the physical how, not all of the why of our lives. But we tried to treat God like science. As a result, God has become an unnecessary being. So can we experience and feel God personally again? As one possibility, I would like to talk about the language of poetry and symbols, not letters. Can we meet and feel God through poetry and symbols? Here we need to remember the Iliad, The Iliad is easily thought of as just an ancient war story, but in this epic, we can meet and understand the ancient Greeks' sense of divinity. Homer describes the gods like humans. They are jealous, they love, they get angry, and they help. But these gods were not mere fiction, but deep symbols that interpret human life and make us reflect on the meaning of our existence. The Iliad is a poem. What is poetry? It is a language that makes us feel what cannot be explained in words. If we want to understand God, it is possible when God is not a physically proven being, but a being that is sensed in our lives and experienced symbolically. God may be a being felt in the language of poetry, not the language of science. In other words, the question we must ask is not simply, does God exist or not? Rather, our question should be, in what way is God appearing in my life? Has God really disappeared? God has not disappeared. Isn't it that God has not disappeared, but that we have lost the sense and language with which we can meet God? Science cannot explain everything. The awe, beauty, and deep resonance of quiet moments that we feel, these things are still alive in us. And within it, perhaps, lies the moment when God speaks to us again. Now, let's step into the world we often call mythology, the world of Homer's Iliad. In it, we encounter more than just an old story, but a worldview filled with gods. In the Iliad, Homer says, "Sing, goddess, the anger of Achilles, son of Peleus." Here, the poet is speaking to a goddess, a muse, but what's interesting is that the poet isn't directly commanding. The poet says, "Sing," but this is also a request, and at the same time it could mean that the poet is asking that the goddess sing within them. In other words, the poet doesn't write the words they write only with their own will, but rather allows something greater and deeper to speak through them. The ancient Greeks thought of inspiration not as just an individual's ability, but as something blowing in from somewhere. The being that gives this inspiration is the muse. The muse is one of 9 goddesses born between Memory and Zeus. But why memory? Memory is not just about recalling old events. It's a repository of all the emotions and experiences, wounds and joys that humans have accumulated. Art is created through this memory, and the muse is the being that evokes the power of that memory. And why are they women? In ancient Greece, femininity was a symbol of delicacy, leisure, consideration, and creative gentleness. It's a different world from the rough and aggressive virtues of war. Creative acts such as song, poetry, theater, and dance were thought to originate from this soft power. Mozart, Bach, Rembrandt, Da Vinci. What do these great artists have in common? They are not simply people who make something well. They seem like people used by divine energy. The works are created by their efforts, but at the same time, they seem to originate from some, quote, stream of inspiration that flowed into them. These people are often ordinary, or rather modest, in appearance. As we know, Rembrandt was not a very handsome man, but his paintings contain some transcendent emotions and perspectives. Art ultimately becomes a tool for capturing something beyond human consciousness, the touch of the muse. There is a very important perspective that we can learn here. That is, that the ancient Greeks did not see the world as simple matter. To the Greeks, the world was a living being filled with gods. Where are the gods? To the ancient Greeks, God is in the mountains, in the rivers, and in the wind. This is not mere superstition, but a perspective that sees will, emotion, and purpose inherent in every part of the world. Today we understand nature as a machine, an object that can be measured, manipulated, and controlled. But as this scientific perspective has become stronger, we have gradually forgotten the divine, living energy in the world. Now, let's ask the question, are we still waiting for the muse? It's not just artists. We all have moments when we feel some special, indescribable insight or inspiration. Perhaps that is the moment when the muse visited us for a brief moment. And that moment may be something salvaged from the sea of memory. It can lead to poetry, stories, paintings, and a direction in life. The muse is not a tangible god, but symbolizes the power to give us true inspiration and change our lives. The world full of gods is still alive. We seem to have forgotten the gods, but in fact, we may have lost the language that described them. To look at the world again as a world full of gods is to restore meaning and sensation to nature human emotions, and the entire universe. It is also a very important recovery of the senses that we can regain in an age full of emptiness and meaninglessness. Today we've discussed a very old question. Our question is not, does God really exist? But where was God, and why did we lose that sense? The Iliad is a literary window that shows how the ancient Greeks saw the world, and what emotions the gods aroused, and what meaning they conveyed in that world. Those gods are not just fiction. They were personifications of emotions, fears, inspirations, pains, and beauties that sprang from deep within human beings. In other words, God was not just something that existed, but something that was felt. God may be a thinking being, but above all, a being that makes us feel. The reason why ancient poets asked the muse to sing was because they wanted to connect with some power that was not within them, that is, a sensory order beyond human beings. We may call this sense divinity or inspiration, but today we are gradually losing this sense. Nature is no longer the home of the gods, but has become a measurable resource and a subject of experimentation, and religion is being reduced to a metaphor and psychological symbol for the human condition. The gods have left, and what remains is a, quote, mechanically assembled world. Therefore, our question is this: can we feel God again? Can we approach the deeper meaning of the world and existence again through the language of symbols and metaphors? No one can say for sure. However, one thing is clear. Today, we have traced the very small traces of God and the echoes of forgotten senses. The language of God is the language of literature and symbols, and it is connected to the deep emotions of our lives. Like the worldview of ancient Greece, we need to imagine a world full of gods again. By doing so, we can understand the deeper dimensions of human experience. After all, God may not be outside, but inside us, that is, on the boundary between consciousness and unconsciousness, in the gap between fact and symbol, and in the things we have not yet explained. I would like to conclude the lecture by introducing the last question. When was the last time you felt God? This has been Young Ho Cho. See you next time. Thank you.